read from my laptop, but you'll be on in the background.
Brilliant. Right, I'll mute myself now. Good luck, guys.
Great, thank you. And Sam, is it auto muted?
Sorry.
Is it auto muted when people join in?
Yeah, I believe so, but I think I can mute people if people join, sort of thing.
You can
as
can
well.
do that. Okay, that's
Brilliant.
Thank you, Sam.
No worries. Bye.
You know, I used to think I was good at these tech things, but
You don't need a degree to learn it.
yeah.
My computers just teach me what I need to do.
Yeah. Oh, indeed.
Oh,
great. How have you been, Joe?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, it's good. Good. I tried to read some of this, but it took me a while too.
Some of it's quite heavy. I was conscious that maybe some of it is a bit difficult.
No, it's good.
Can you see, Sean? Yeah, all good. Thank you. Okay. Might is one of these open?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You got a glass? Oh yeah. Would you like a glass, Joe?
I'm fine.
Do you want a glass for your water?
Oh yeah, sure.
Hello, Harry. I'm Sam. I'm remotely joining this session because I'm not very well today, but Jack and the others are just getting themselves sorted. Jack, we have a new attendee. I'm not sure how well they're able to hear me because I'm usually there with them, but yeah, okay. You should be able to hear them when they get started. But yeah, we have another person online, Jack, if you can hear me.
Yes, great. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so yeah, we're unable to share the screen on this setup. However, if people want to follow the slides, what I could do actually, yeah, why don't I copy the link? Sorry? Oh, Darren has it.
If you go across there, I can do it on the screen.
Oh, really?
So you can, yeah, if you press on there, I can just press on there instead.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Let's do that.
Oh,
yeah. Let's see. If I share this link, maybe people can follow the slides. I have to make sure that it's not edited, but
what are you trying to do, Jack?
Well, I've just sent the link to the slides on the chat. So if people want to follow the slides, they can, and it should be a viewing only option. Perfect. Yeah, great. There you go. That solves that. And then hopefully you'll be able to hear our conversation. And I think this is probably it, guys.
I like this. You start these guys.
Yeah.
That never associated the two, Rousseau.
Yeah.
Everybody. Yeah. It's a good one to do a topic on.
You see, I started on Charlotte in English landscape gardens.
Yeah.
And secondary literature always has that research. The first to mention of Charlotte.
Yeah.
And I was curious whether it was really right, especially because they just compete each other.
Yeah.
And nobody goes in for it.
Okay.
So I don't think any of those who repeat that have only read Charlotte.
Oh, right. They just sort of, yeah. Close.
So I got suspicious and
That's good. Yeah. Very good. Nice. Wow.
Great. I think we'll make a start. I think this is probably the group for tonight. I did my best to advertise, but I think a lot of people had other commitments. But we got a good group online also. I've set myself the ambitious task of trying to walk through Descartes, Kant, and Hegel in an hour. So we'll see how far we go. Okay, Darren, can you mind getting the slide for me? Thank you. So I want to sort of situate it in context with regard to some of the seminars we've done most recently, and I know this will be useful for you, Joe, because I know you haven't
Thank you, yeah.
Been with us for a little while, because we've not been here for a little while. So we did a seminar, I think 4 weeks ago on Luther, Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. That was led by Sam, and then subsequently we looked at the Copernican revolution in astronomy. But two quite pivotal episodes in sort of early modern history. And I think they're quite illustrative to help us to understand sort of the birth of modern philosophy. And people usually attribute that to Descartes, who's very famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." And he formulated this. Oh, do we have someone else joining us, Darren?
No, they were looking in the window, so I thought they were trying to get
Yeah.
in, but they're not.
Oh, no. Yeah, he's famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." And he formulates this in the context of trying to recover some certitude about the way the world is. We'll talk about this in some depth, but I'm wondering, yeah, how did we get there? And I think it's worth just having a few comments on Lucer and also early modern science to maybe illustrate this. So I'd characterize Lucer's sort of fundamental, I think, issue as being rooted in his own personal struggles with faith. So he's a monastic. He famously makes a pilgrimage to Rome, and he climbs the Scala Sancta, which are the holy steps, and he gets to the top and realizes he doesn't have a well-grounded faith, and all of his intellectual efforts go into trying to explain this for himself, to explain how faith can be valid as something as more of a disposition or an emotional or psychological state. How can that be valid, under what conditions? And he gets a bit caught up in this debate between faith and grace, and he thinks that grace is sort of contradicts freedom. So he had this basic opposition. If my salvation depends on grace, then I'm not free. I'm not freely choosing, and therefore he chooses faith. However, in the Catholic tradition, it would be seen that salvation is by grace through faith. So grace refers to God's gift of Himself. Faith to man's response. It's in faith in itself, therefore, a grace. Though it's never imposed, it's objectified in the sacraments. And you have that sort of guarantee by the apostolic succession. Luther didn't find security in that, and I think it's partly because he got hung up on this idea of necessity, which became a very big philosophical term. So the consequence, he basically settled in the camp of faith alone, and with that he gets rid of the sacraments, he gets rid of the church as an institution, and he really gets rid of liturgy and the way the body participates. So what I'm suggesting is that in Luther you have a mind-body dualism, because he doesn't understand the economy of grace in the church. He turns faith into a purely intellectual exercise, essentially, and now it's just about the personal conscience in relationship to God. And how that might be mediated by the body or by an institution or by sacraments or by worship in a communal form. It's not something he can really make sense of. It's not on the same level. So again, the consequences, it involves prioritizing the subjective experience over public and objective factors. It makes faith an act of assent of the mind, which fails to positively incorporate the body, and by extension, work and tradition. So it's in that context that I want to then come to Descartes a bit, because Descartes is famous for having created the mind-body dualism. At least that's what people say about him. And they say that modern philosophy is about the mind-body dualism, how we get outside ourselves, in terms of being certain that the way we think about the world is an accurate reflection of the way the world is. They blame it on Descartes, but I think this is already a bit deeper. It's already in Lucer, is my sense. Actually, I should also, just before we go on to Descartes, I forgot, I also have a little summary of the stuff on the scientists. This was another important aspect. So we'll footnote the face grace thing, and sort of as a precursor to the mind-body problem in Descartes. I just want to quickly remind us about sort of the significance of Copernicus. Sam was very helpfully telling us, this was, I think,
we have a couple more people, Jack, just to let you know online. So I just thought I'd butt in quickly to say that you can get the slides online at the link that's been sent in the chat if you haven't seen the chat. to the two new people that have joined our call.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to walk through again the scientists. So Sam helpfully pointed out that the early experimental scientists like Copernicus, Galileo, Bacon, they have in their own way a break with tradition, like Luther did with the church. Their break involves a return to mathematics. They sort of reject Aristotle's relegation of mathematics. Aristotle said that mathematics wasn't quite what described motion, but it would just, you could describe it in terms of its qualities, in terms of its act and potency, and this was more of a natural description of the world rather than a geometric description of the world. Plato would say that it's a geometric description. So the astronomers who are turning back to the heavens and seeing that they actually can, on these new axioms of making the Earth central to the universe, they can actually calculate with incredible accuracy the orbits of things on a much more simplified model. This sort of further strengthens this notion that maybe maybe mathematics actually gets to something more real than ordinary sense experience.
So just to clarify, what were they making the centre of the universe?
For the Earth. So there was the Copernican revolution was changing the model from the sun being the Earth being the I've mixed it up. Yes, exactly. Sorry, yes. Yeah. Changing the model from the Earth being the centre of the universe to the sun. This simplified everything and made it much more plausible that mathematics had some kind of objective validity with respect to the natural world. But then you have it sort of almost in tension with that, you have someone like Bacon who sees the need for an inductive method which proceeds not from first principles but from experimentation and observation. Now he's a bit later than Copernicus, granted, but so he's criticizing the logical and discursive character of Aristotle. Copernicus is criticizing the naturalism, let's call it. Descartes says we need to completely revise the notions of matter and form in their entirety. So like this cup has what it's made of, but it also has its form, which sort of defines it as a cup, and it makes it recognizable as such. And now Descartes is already saying that science tells us matter and form are supposed to be sort of almost relativized, in the sense that when I dissect the human body, I find at different levels what appears as a formal element at one level is just matter at another level. So the organ system is in a way the form of the tissue, and the tissue is in a way the form of the cells that make up the tissue. But it just depends which level of analysis you look at. So even those terms of Aristotle have to be rethought. Finally, Kant identifies that the kind of logic that Aristotle was interested in, which is called syllogistic logic, that's about it's like Socrates is a man. It's like all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That kind of a logical sequence. That doesn't actually explain how physics works, according to Kant, because if I have a force, I push this glass, in proportion to my thrusting of the glass forward, there is friction. And so there's this question about how, because one thing is, another thing must also be, which is distinct. And syllogistic logic doesn't really handle that very well. So you have all of these problems that emerge in the space of a couple hundred years, sort of against the Greek understanding of the world, and particularly against Aristotle's understanding of the world. And obviously these have been the subject of much discussion in the history, so it's not like this discussion is final at this point, but it is sort of the state of things. So that's the terrain we're dealing with when we come to the first of the modern philosophers. The Greek way of seeing things is out, in large part, and there is a real culture setting in of skepticism and doubting what we've received, and really trying to recreate our whole edifice of knowledge from scratch. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Dora. From this point, we could maybe enter into something more of a discussion. So I should introduce Sean to this method. So I don't usually just lecture. I keep the quotes up here so we can sort of read them together and study them and talk about them a bit, and we'll just see how we get on. So let's see what Descartes had to say. He had a very biographical text called the Meditations on First Philosophy, I think it's called, in full. Some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehood that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary once in the course of my life to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. So he goes on to elaborate some stages to this, and we'll just take them together. So first stage, from time to time I found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. He gives us an example of this. You put a twig in water. When you put a twig in water, the light refracts and you see the twig is bent when you look at it from above the water, even though the twig itself is straight. That's one example of this. He goes on, how often asleep at night am I convinced of just such familiar events that I am here in my dressing gown, sitting by the fire, when in fact I am lying undressed in bed. I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. A little more strange and hard to grasp, but I think he means he's sleepy and he starts to get different ideas of what his actual state is. But he seems to suggest that it's not, he doesn't see a basis on which you can distinguish being awake from not being awake, which I personally find a bit contestable, and I think the quality is quite different. But anyway, that's Descartes. Finally, he said, I will suppose that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning, hath employed all his energies in order to deceive me. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colours, shapes, sound, all external things are merely the delusions of dreams which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. Let's pause there. I want to ask, first of all, do each of these three have the same problem, or is Descartes somehow deepening his criticism at all? Or do they all have one factor in common, maybe?
But like you could see some progression. Could be if first of all he's saying, we can't trust them completely. Then you say, I don't even know if I'm awake or asleep. To might be completely tricked by a malicious demon. I don't know if this sort of gets somehow more doubtful, more doubting as we go.
More doubting in the sense of quantity, or is the object of the doubt, strictly speaking, changing?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because first of all, it's just can't trust what I see, and then it's sort of doubting more the framework, or more the whole kind of whether or not I'm awake.
Yeah.
Different type of doubt, and then sort of a spiritual thing bringing in a demon.
Yeah.
A different type of doubt as well.
Yeah. Any?
Yeah, I feel like he's really questioning his. He's identified that there's an extent that his learned experience could be a form of potential indoctrination of thought up until this point, or maybe he's building up to this, and that each quote sort of builds on that, I think.
Yeah, it seemed to go a bit deeper. I think he begins with sense data, but he ends with almost the fundamental goodness of being. I mean, it's ultimately talking about the elements of sense data: the sky, the air, the earth, colours, shapes, sound, all external things, merely the delusion of dream. But then he brings in the moral qualifier of the malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning. It's a bit of a trope in philosophy, in the history of Descartes philosophy in particular. He's approaching something. Let's see what he's approaching. He said, but immediately I noticed that when I was trying in this way to think everything forth, it was necessarily that I who was thinking was something. And observing that this truth, I am thinking, therefore I exist, was so firm and so sure that all the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics were incapable of shaking it. And I decided that I could not accept it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy that I was seeking. So how does he save himself from doubt here?
His own existence, his own thought.
So why does that save him from doubt?
So,
It's the fact he can even think about what he's questioning. It's
Yeah.
showing that he exists.
Yeah, exactly. He's always the one posing the question.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
I'm struck by how personal Kant this is.
Yes, yes.
Here's how I want all philosophers to
Yeah,
to say, this is the process I'm going through. Here it is out of interest.
No,
I guess he wasn't expecting to sort of get a whole wave of philosophy.
It's evident from subsequent things which we'll read that he really wasn't expecting. There's certainly the criticism that came of him. I don't think he would have believed it. It's really interesting. I want to ask, what's at stake in these ruminations? What's at stake in these questions that Descartes is asking? So he's talking about certainty. But is it just an inquiry into truth, or is it also something deeper? Does it tell us something, or is he asking fundamental questions about who we are? And what are those questions? Maybe. Or another way of putting it, what does it mean to be a kind of being that can have certainty? That can have truth, that can know truth?
It's somehow less human to feel like I can assume I can have certainty. Whereas if I'm prepared to accept reality as I perceive it, unless I've got good reason to suppose I'm being deceived, to go around with a common sense way of living and being, assume you're all here as normal, this isn't a dream, and so on, that's a sort of seems like a reasonable way to live. And then to build from there to philosophy with my ethics and with my, all manner of other things. But once you start doubting the foundations, it seems to be against what's a kind of normal, spontaneous way of living, which seems to pit philosophy against my normal life. Whereas what I want from a philosophy is something that sort of enriches my normal life and builds on it, rather than says your normal life is a complete load of rubbish and you're completely deluded almost.
Yeah.
And then there's just the realm of philosophy here. But then when you have to get on with normal life, just get on with it as normal and forget about philosophy, because otherwise it will hold you back. So then there's a kind of division. Whereas I'm looking for harmony between my thinking and
right. Yeah.
Jack, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ari in the chat says it's the sort of start of being able or capable of perceiving what is real as an individual, as an agent.
Yeah.
And I would add that in terms of intellectual history, it fires the starting gun on the sort of wave of skepticism. You know about these sort of philosophical tendencies more than me, Jack, but in terms of that kind of early modern skepticism that comes with Montaigne, Pyrrhonism as well, which the writer that I look at in my PhD, Paul de Rapin, sort of takes on when he's sort of described as a historical Pyrrhonist in terms of being skeptical about the way we read history and the truths in history, and it opens the ground for later thinkers that we've discussed, like Locke, in terms of exploring knowledge through experience, and Hume pushing skepticism further by questioning, well, everything when it comes to causation, the self. But it also leads to just a nice loop back in. Jack and I have just recorded a podcast episode. Well, say just when did we record it, Jack? Last Wednesday, on Burke and the idea, the sort of counter idea to the skeptical tendency that's pushed at this time, which is that sometimes maybe it's not that easy to be so reductive and be skeptical of everything, that maybe we do need to rely on certain, as Burke calls them, prejudices to be able to understand the world around us. So that's kind of a broad intellectual history sort of groundwork to the trajectory of skepticism.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sam. That's really really helpful, because I think it's also tying in quite nicely to what you were saying, Joe. I mean, we quite like to take for granted. It seemed appropriate and natural for us to take for granted our experience of the world, and it seemed that a philosophy that would sort of go so far to undermine it seemed unproductive, especially because you sort of have to start from yourself. You have to start from what you've received in some sense. And a lot of philosophers ask whether it's even possible to do what Descartes claimed to have done here, and to examine, to completely pull apart all of these received notions and to scrutinize them in this way, to turn that into an absolute method. It is questionable.
Sorry if I just something on the last one as well, which is I really agree with what you were saying. But just from reading the quotes, I almost feel like, in layman's terms, he's almost trying to benchmark or pinpoint where this sort of blank canvas of thinking is, by using, the sky, the air, the earth, the colours, the shapes. And it's quite interesting seeing, like, where's his start point for his new evolution of thought?
Yes, right. Well, his start point, I think, from the last one will be the I. The I who is thinking, the cogito in the Latin, but he wrote it first in French, which is interesting to know. The je pense, je pense donc je suis, and then they translate. That was also quite radical about this. It's interesting that it's a biographical text. He's philosophizing by telling you about his life and his experience, very much like Sam mentioned this guy Montaigne, who was an essayist. Also, that was quite novel. He's about 100 years before Descartes. Descartes writing his biography. He's writing it in French. People used to write these big philosophy things in Latin. So the last person to do that really is Spinoza. In terms of to produce a masterwork in Latin, it was Spinoza. He then translates this into that. So that's also just interesting. Gives you a bit of a sense for the character of this. If you go to the next slide, please, Dora. Now this is where this
Edict of Nantes,
very interesting.
Edict of Nantes, Jack, as well. And this is massively in the context of the Big Toleration Act that's granted. He's writing just after the Edict of Nantes has been passed. So the state legalization of thinking freely, essentially, in France for the first time. Well, not freely, but as far as France gets in thinking freely at this time, before it's revoked 100 years later, but allowing Huguenots to practice.
I see. Yeah, okay. Is this in response to the Bartholomew Day massacre?
Yeah, as a result of the wars of religion, across the continent, and Henry IV passes that, and that's just before Descartes' time. So that's also a massive kind of political factor in terms of how can we understand truth and in this rapidly changing world that Descartes' born into.
Yeah. I mean, it's also emblematic of sort of what the Reformation was about. So you're really in a time where the received culture is one of skepticism and scrutiny, because there's just so many ideas to challenge the way you think now. I think we're in such a time presently as well. I think this is very much the spirit of our own age, which is also why it's worth reading this stuff. So Descartes goes on, and this is, I think, really fascinating, especially when you think about what we think of Descartes as lay people who just hear things. He says, the great benefit of these arguments is not, in my view, that they prove what they establish, namely that there really is a world, and that human beings have bodies and so on, since no sane person has ever seriously doubted these things. The point is that in considering these arguments, we have come to realize that they are not as solid or as transparent as the arguments which lead us to the knowledge of our own minds and of God. Then he goes on, in the case of our clearest and most careful judgments, if such judgments were simply false, they could not be corrected by any clearer judgment or by means of any other natural faculty. In such case, I simply assert that it's impossible for us to be deceived. That second one probably more of a tangent. It's sort of just him asserting his sense of that certainty is possible, due to the clarity of our faculties. But this first one is really interesting because people I think mischaracterize Descartes a bit, and they they treat him as taking these problems really seriously and having this very precarious solution to them. But he's very pragmatist about it. From reading this, he's no one really doubting these things. But so what precisely is the question that's interesting Descartes then, if it's not solving these problems?
Methodology. The how.
Okay. Mm-hmm. The methodology, and sort of what precisely is the fruit of that? But I think he comes to a key conclusion here, where he contrasts one kind of knowing with another kind of knowing, or one kind of foundation with another kind of foundation.
This sort of, he's wanting a very, I don't know how to put it accurately, but a sort of watertight, very one that can't be irrefutable sort of foundation, and then a foundation that anyone with common sense can just agree with because it's normal.
Yeah.
So you say, I'm not doubting that actually any sane person is fine with experiencing reality. He's saying he wants some kind of other foundation that will somehow maybe in the world of thought will be more robust.
And what is that other foundation?
I'm not sure what it would be called. Is it something to do with rational
reason?
No.
Yeah. And I guess it's definitely to do with reason or logic or first principles.
Right.
And his first principle is the self. Let's say the self who thinks, and that's characterized by Descartes as the soul. And the second principle is God, because I have a sense of myself. I haven't presented this argument here, but Descartes says that I have a sense of myself as a finite being, and to have a sense of the finite, I must also have a sense of the infinite. It's a kind of ontological argument, if you're interested in those things, which is interesting because no one ever talks about it in this way, but it sort of is.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Sam.
Oyser has just commented saying, in comparing the arguments, he makes an argument that if we have certainty of something we could doubt, then we must have more certainty of what we couldn't doubt.
Makes an argument if we have certainty of something we could doubt it, then we must have certainty of, yes, exactly, yes. Thank you, Ozia. I think it's I just want to say one last thing about this. Do you think it's strange that he says that sense is not as apparent, but the world of reason is more apparent? I think that's interesting. Because I think a lot of people think this is more apparent, more concrete.
I suppose it goes back to very occasionally the senses might deceive us. Whereas once you've got watertight reason, that's not going to change or deceive you if it is reason. Yeah.
And yet modern people really struggle with the idea of soul, even with logic. Logic is something you sort of just abstract in some sense. It's sort of a tool, which is, interesting view. And certainly with God, that's obviously very difficult for people. These things are not self-evident for modern people, but they're self-evident for Descartes. It's very interesting that paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Because he tried to seek for first principles. It's very, very Greek actually. Okay.
Maybe reason is more fundamental to knowledge than the senses, Oyser has followed up.
Yes, great, Sam. That's really great. Yeah, reason is more fundamental to knowledge. There you go.
That's Oyser's point, not mine.
Great. Thank you, Oyser. Yeah. Perfect. That's a great summary. Reason is more fundamental to knowledge. That's the claim. Okay. Let's if we go to the next slide. Thank you, Dara. I've now put two pairs together. I'll read. So the first two are from Descartes, and then I have two from David Hume. And we'll read them together and we'll just contrast these. So Descartes goes on. I came to see that the exclusive concern of mathematics is with questions of order or measure, and that it is irrelevant whether the measuring question involves numbers, shapes, stars, sound, or any other object raised concerning order and measure, irrespective of the subject matter. That this science should be termed mathesis universalis, universal mathematics. That's my assumption. Maybe mathesis had a specific meaning, I don't know. A venerable term with a well-established meaning, for it covers everything that entitles the other sciences to be called branches of mathematics. He goes on, he says, those long chains composed of very simple and easy reasoning which geometers customarily use to arrive at their most difficult demonstration have given me occasion to suppose that all the things that come within the scope of human knowledge are interconnected in the same way. So again, we have the idea of first principle, deductive reasoning, mathematics is the model. Let's contrast it with Hume. That the sun will not rise tomorrow is no less intelligible a proposition and implies no more contradiction than the affirmation that it will rise. We should in vain, therefore, attempt to demonstrate its falsehood. That is, to demonstrate the falsehood of the proposition that the sun won't come up tomorrow. Which is an interesting thing to say. Were it demonstrably false, it would imply a contradiction and could never be distinctly conceived by the mind. He then says, the utmost effort of human reason is to reduce the principles productive of natural phenomena to a greater simplicity. But as to the causes of these general causes, we should in vain attempt their discovery. The most perfect philosophy of the natural kind only staves off our ignorance. So what's being opposed by Hume here? But what's the tension between Descartes and Hume in the passages we read out? Maybe we could begin. What is Hume saying? We spent a bit of time on Descartes. What is Hume saying? Do you think we can prove that the sun will rise tomorrow?
Just a quick point in the chat, Ari said, but how would one begin to reason without the experiential knowledge from using the senses? And in my typical fashion, Jack, I cited Derrida and said that he grapples with this, in of grammatology, and says that the subjective and objective, for exactly that reason, aren't exclusive but integrated into one another in terms of understanding the objective and the subjective. You have to have experience to understand the things going on in your brain, but you also need to use your brain to understand the things going on outside in the real world. So he
totally agree.
tries to deconstruct that binary.
And that, I think we'll sort of advance towards that conclusion by the end of this talk, hopefully, if nothing goes wrong. But I think this is also, I think it was pointed out by Charles Taylor as well, who wrote a bit about Descartes, and he said, Descartes had this method of pulling the ideas from the world and refining them. But Descartes never explains on what grounds the purified ideas are still applicable in the world.
Right.
So this is something he never addresses. Yeah. So, but I just want to stick on Hume, for instance. Or were you going to say someone going to say something about? Yeah.
I just think maybe with Hume he might be based off Kant as well, calling for a separation between universal mathematics in terms of the ratio and the probability and percentage that the sun will not rise tomorrow.
Oh, yes.
And then calling for the non-dual separation in that in terms of thought, because that's a very hard thing to do, I think.
Yeah, interesting.
If you sort of get my gist.
So to clarify what we're talking about here, we see the sun rise 100 times, so we assume that the next day it will rise as well. But there's no logical reason for us to assume that. It's just because we've done it 100 times.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's
Yeah, right.
So then, can we not get to the cause of that? Because as Hume says, you see cause and effect, but you're not actually. That's your mind seeing them. You can't actually prove that A cause B. It's just a series of things happen.
The logical pattern in this.
Right, yeah. Which again is against our normal common sense, our normal life experience, which is I see a car hit a lamppost, the lamppost falls over. Hume might say, well, the car moved that way and the lamppost moved that way, but you can't say that this caused that. And it's like he's playing a game, but I'm not sure how convinced he is of that kind of.
Well, it's interesting actually. Hume claims to be convinced by it, but when you read his treatise on miracles, he drops all of this in order to criticize the possibility of miracles. Because on Hume's view, you shouldn't be able to disprove miracles, but he writes a whole treatise against miracles, and it's one of the really jarring lapses of his critical judgment.
Jack,
but I mean,
would you not say also it's important that this is, because isn't one of Hume's anecdotes in the Black Swan theory, and just for context, this is happening at a time of imperial expansion. So obviously the Western world is encountering things which they previously could have banked on being guaranteed, and actually there is mass fluctuation. So the idea being that, you know, in Western Europe, you only ever encountered white swans, but then they, on the expeditions down to Australia, biologists encounter black swans. So there's this idea that everything in swan world that had been known to be true had suddenly been upended.
Yeah. So you have the idea of anomaly, and so I guess you have I guess someone like Hume probably operates on the kind of notions of probability, common sense. But in principle, I guess these things, I mean, maybe this is a point of contention in the debate, but whether such terms as probability and common sense have any basis.
And also, just because once in a while you come across an anomaly doesn't therefore mean we can't trust anything that comes into our common sense. Like just in a while, like going back to Descartes, once in a while I might be deceived by my senses. Doesn't mean I can never trust my senses. I need to know that once in a while I might be deceived. But I don't know if it's the same with this, that generally I can trust causation. Then once in a while I might realise, okay, there's an anomaly here and we can investigate it further.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how they've built a whole theory out of just the fact that anomalies sometimes happen.
Yeah.
And they sort of extrapolated that to therefore just throw everything out.
Yeah, because they almost start from the same place. Sort of this question of the integrity of sense data, but Hume doesn't see a path from there to the principles. He doesn't see a bridge, where Descartes does see a bridge. Although we've suggested that maybe the bridge isn't fully worked out for him, but he thinks he has a bridge and he wants there to be a bridge. Hume doesn't think there is a bridge. You can't go from the causes of the causes. It's sort of you sort of locked in your present moment of experience. You can't get out of the present moment of experience in terms of trying to make authoritative claims about what is and what will be, especially what will be or what ought to be. So Hume has what? Sorry, Sam.
So would you say Descartes uses skepticism to establish certainty against Hume, who's using the same skepticism but to show the limits or the sort of expansive potential? We also have a couple of points. So this is a form of rationalism versus empiricism, Ari said.
Yes.
And Oyzer has said, I think the proof by induction is a little different from the causation question, because the causation would be on the assumption of the consistency of nature, while there is no assumption to say that we know what the full set of possibilities is.
Oh, yeah.
The full set of possibilities.
So with the swans, for example, we just didn't know the black swans.
Yes.
Whereas with the idea of the car hitting a lamppost, we assume there's consistency, whereas there might. Yeah, so they're slightly different. They're slightly different sort of topics, aren't they?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. We can go to the next slide. Thank you, Dara. Okay. A little bit of an interlude. So I guess what we're struggling with is, so Hume has this phrase called the is-ought problem, and he sort of thinks he's put a guillotine between them. So sort of, as we said, that bridge between the sensible and the principles of the rational world. I summarize this as fact versus value because this is, I think, more general sort of problem. So maybe it has advantages, this terminology, it has defects, but maybe it'll become clear why I use these terms. So in classical philosophy, they have this idea of teleology, which is that things have an end for which they are made or for which they exist. The end of this glass is to hold nice Swiss wine so that I can drink it. The end of that book is to be read. In Catholic theology, the end of the human person is communion with God. So you have all of these notions of teleology. Now, in modern science, they sort of, I think, were a bit ambivalent about this because so Aristotle had 4 causes, and teleology was one cause, and then there was also like a cause for like what it's made of. Then there was like the cause of its sort of being in principle, and then there was like the cause of like the physical cause, so like how my arm moves the cup. So this was sort of efficient cause, material cause, formal cause, final or teleological cause. The modern scientists sort of collapse it all into one. Now, on different thinkers have different views on it, but basically it's just efficient causation. It's just how things move. And then some also incorporate the mathematical into that. So, well, I can calculate where that will be at t equals 0, 10, 100, a million. I can calculate where this cup will be in the world. So, because I have the mass. That's, of course, if you take the first principles thing seriously, and if you take the idea seriously that there can be a bridge between the mathematics and the world. So, in a way, the sort of moderns can bring the end back into the matter, into the physics, so that and I think the most serious of the early modern sciences did see that the sort of whole cosmos does have a direction, purpose, direction, order, and unity across the whole natural world. So that's why people like Descartes and also this other guy Leibniz, who's quite important, who we don't have time to talk about today, they turn to mathematics and metaphysics to discover the intrinsic order of nature. And that's really what defined rationalism in this context. And they sometimes spoke of what's called physical theology, which was an attempt to express a kind of divine end of the physical world, to sort of show that. So what it is basically is we have mass equations that summarize the whole trajectory of the world, let's say, hypothetically. Now, for the rationalist, there was a certain divinity to that because it's not reducible to matter, so it's part of the intelligible world, this unity of all natural reality. But in a way, it's the hand of God. But it's the hand of God in the sense of a law that's been planted into the universe. That's the way they see things. But what we're seeing in Hume is a direct challenge to this idea. If there's no necessary connection between what we observe and what we postulate as its governing principle, then this sort of unity of the physical world and the intelligible world, or even the theological world, it sort of struggles. And this is something who our next thinker, Immanuel Kant, also he picks out this, and he already early on suspects what you might describe as a covert dualism in physical theology. He doesn't really think the rationalists do have these worlds bridged as well together as they claim, because I mean, if you think matter in itself has its own lawfulness, does the will of God as a creator somehow have to conform to that lawfulness, or is he giving it that lawfulness? If he's giving it that lawfulness, is the physical world really distinct? So you have all these problems that emerge, where, however way you draw the problem, it seems that if you want to bridge physics and God, it seems that you have to subordinate one to the other. Or you can say there's no bridge. That's the bind. Would you like some clarity on that, Sean? You look puzzled. Okay.
Catch it up.
Okay. So, yeah, the situation is, if God creates a world which has its own lawfulness, its own order, does he limit himself when he creates that? That's the question that's being raised. Does he limit? Does he? So basically, what kind of freedom is it that God has as a creator? Is it something that's absolute, in the sense of being able to create what he likes, or once you create something that has a distinct order and intelligibility, does that constrain him? This is sort of the question that this term physical theology raises. I think it's fundamental to this question of how the material and the intelligible and even the divine are actually related. So Kant boils it down to, again, just to the question of do our thinking bear any necessary connection to its objects out there, like Hume had? Your next slide, please, Dara. Okay. So Kant is this is Kant. I'm just, for those online, I'm just showing them the cover of the Critique of Pure Reason. It has a very nice portrait of Kant. He looks very stern.
There was a comment, Jack, saying that sounded similar to Ibn Arabi's concept of unity of being, which is core to Sufi metaphysics.
Ah, okay. I'm not familiar with it, but I'd love to study that a bit further. I'll look into that. Thank you. I think I might find some sources on that in Anthony Kenny's book, maybe. But if Ari wants to post in the interlude a brief summary of that, I'd be more than happy for us to read it. In the meantime, I'll press on with Kant. So Kant, he's born in Königsberg in 1724. It's modern day, yes, Russia. It's Kaliningrad.
Oh, funny. Didn't realise.
Yeah,
yes, I think it's an external oblast. Used to be a Prussian city, but ever since.
But what's the name of it, Sam? Is it Kaliningrad now?
Kaliningrad is the oblast, yeah. And the town that makes up the main city is Kaliningrad, but it's not connected to Russia. It's about 30 miles from the border of Belarus, which is called the Sulaki Gap, which separates it by Lithuania and Poland.
Okay.
So is it owned by Russia now?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it is. Because of its position on the Baltic Sea for a port for Russia to maintain.
Oh yeah, okay.
For how long is that since World War II or
even prior to imperial times, but after the fall of Prussia in its more established sense. So all of the kind of Baltic conflict that takes place in the wake of the First World War with the independence movements, but Kaliningrad stays a Russian oblast, disconnected from the main chunk of Russia.
Well, great, thank you, Sam. So Kant's from Kaliningrad. It was Prussian. So in his university years, he's immersed in a particular dispute between Newton and Leibniz on what is matter. I won't summarize it right now, but it's really interesting. He's also interested in a guy called Christian Wolff, who would treat thought and sensation as distinct in themselves. That's very important to Wolff. You can't confuse them. You have to keep them separate. We talked a bit about this earlier, sort of how. Sort of this question Sam was answering in the chat about sort of how do they relate to one another? How do the ideas, don't we somehow borrow from sense before we think? Don't we take some ideas from the world before we think? And but again, Kant sort of this sort that you keep them separately, and that was quite formative for him. He gradually advances towards a picture of the fundamental problem of philosophy. And I illustrated it earlier when I moved this and talked about the forward force versus the friction. How is it that because one thing is, another thing totally distinct from it must necessarily also be? So, for instance, you look at the world as a creation and you might ask, how is it that because there is a world, there must be a God? Or you might ask, how is it because I have my personal perspective, there must be an objective world? Or how is it because I think there must be sensation that corresponds to it? Or an object out there that corresponds to it? So he has some stages. We talked a little bit about the physical theology. So he becomes suspicious of this notion of physical theology, and he says instead we have to begin with necessary truths and logically deduce their relationship to the empirical. We have to begin in the thoughts, and we have to deduce their relationship to the objective world, the sensible world. Later, he wrestles a bit more with the matter-spirit distinction, and he argues for a new understanding of spirit. He thinks no sense can be made of it, and he thinks that it really just has to be that it's just a purely moral concept, a moral category, the law whereby we conform our own will to the will of everybody else in harmony. That's the idea of spirit. So it's not another kind of substance. What he's quite keen to assert, it's not another kind of thing, a thing without space and time dimensions, right? That would be the idea. That's how the early moderns thought spirit was defined classically. They thought it was a thing that had no dimension, which is really strange idea. And you get into all kinds of problems with a thing that has a substance that has no dimension. At least if you think of it on a scientific way, it makes no sense whatsoever. And now I don't think that's necessarily a reflection of how classical philosophers did think of spirit, but that's how the early moderns did think the classic people thought of spirit. So we have to take all this with a bit of a pinch of salt. I think they're very interesting questions, but they're so often formulated on basic misconceptions about the history of philosophy and so forth. So it is again important to see how science has influenced the whole culture of thought in this time. And so for this reason, Kant completely retreats from the world as we know it for an understanding of spirit, and he just looks into our moral nature. So if I will something, if I want something, well, we all have competing desires. Well, what principle would enable us to come into unity? And that's spirit. Spirit enables us to come into unity with one another, because spirit is characterized first and foremost by a law that is in our hearts that we all share. Kant later formulates it as what he called the categorical imperative. It's basically a sense of absolute duty, doing the thing which we can all do without contradiction. So he has some strange examples, but if I try and will stealing as a universal principle, it doesn't really work because it sort of negates the idea of private property, and stealing is defined in relationship to that idea. Therefore, we can't will it logically as a principle of action. Yeah. So it's a really interesting way of approaching spirit, and he builds a whole moral philosophy on this. So there's like the empirical world, or in Kant here, there's the empirical world, and then there's the moral world. So spirit has nothing to do with the empirical world. It's purely to do with the will. And you get to see this.
How does the two connect? Sorry.
Very good question.
How does our will direct our body, for example?
Yes. Well, yeah. It's interesting that Kant doesn't really have an answer. Doesn't even raise that question.
Because obviously, if you go back to the scholastics, they would just say we're a unified person, and we make a decision rather than our will has a word with our body, and our body does it. It's just we are as a unified subject act.
I correct myself. Kant does have an answer to this, and a very interesting one.
Yeah.
But it will take some time to get there. But we will come to this question. I think it's fundamental. My last point here is about the syllogistic logic, and Kant says that syllogistic logic can't capture how because one thing is something else can't be. And he actually shows that this pattern of the equal and opposites in physics is a pattern that appears everywhere, in ethics, in psychology, in cosmology, in metaphysics. So he really just boiled down all of philosophy to this question of how, because I exist, something else distinct from me is, or all iterations of that question. Next slide, please, Dara. Okay, so now we can do some more critical reading. Okay, Kant says, appearances are themselves nothing but sensible representations which, as such, and in themselves, must not be taken as objects existing outside our power of representation. Let's pause on that for a moment. what does he mean by appearances?
Or what you sense.
Okay, what you see and sense. Okay, that's great. So their sensible representations must not be taken as objects existing outside our power of representation. What might that mean?
The distinction between the phenomenal and noumenal world, Jack.
Yes, but we don't want to introduce distinction. We want to understand the one that is before us.
Our perception versus the object, as Euser has just said.
Our perception versus the object. Okay, I think that is relevant. So what is the relationship between our perception and the object, according to this line? It's a bit of a trick question. Because he says the appearance can't be taken as an object existing outside our power of representation.
So like we have no access to the object, we just have
Right.
thoughts about it.
Okay, yes. So we have experience, but I think Kant seems to think that when we talk about objects in themselves, we refer to something that in a way would be beyond our experience of it. So we have a perspective on the world, but we don't have what the world is in itself. So
we have only the shadows. There's no climbing out.
We have only the shadows.
No climbing out of the cave.
And what's even more important is that appearance is grounded not in the object, at least according to this sentence, but according to our power of representation. We represent the world. It's an interesting thesis.
So everything is made up of the subjective, in essence, or is reliant on the subject.
Yes, that's what this implies. Is that what Descartes has been saying?
No, because there's still an objective truth as the sort of bedrock, even in the skepticism.
And where is that objective truth? Where does that reside?
In the sort of rational, in the logos.
Okay, but then it does reside in the soul, and so my first access to it is in me. But then there is also God, so we saw that Descartes could connect to God straight away. And so maybe that step sort of guarantees that truth isn't absolutely dependent on me. It has some kind of validity beyond me. That might be reasonable to suppose. But Descartes seemed to think that truth is mind independent, even though minds access it fundamentally, which is fine. Kant seems to be saying that the appearances, the way we experience the world, is sort of bound to us. So we shape our experience, and what beyond that is another question, completely different question. Let's read on, because this is trying to understand Kant from one line. Kant turned out to be a lot more complicated. Our apprehension of the manifold of appearance is always successive, and therefore always changing. We can never determine from this alone whether this manifold, as an objective experience, is simultaneous or successive, if something does not ground it, which always exists, i.e. something lasting and persisting, of which all change in simultaneity are nothing but so many ways in which that which persists exists. Only in that which persists, therefore, are temporal relations possible for simultaneity and succession of the only relation in time. I think that last sentence is a bit wordy, we can discount it. What's the general gist of that paragraph? Successive. So we have let's see, it seems so frame 1, the glass is here. Frame 2, the glass is there. Frame 3. So you can imagine that experience it's obviously continuous, but you can imagine it being lots of infinitely discrete sort of snapshots, right?
Like a bunch of photographs in your head.
Yeah, exactly. Like a photograph in your head that's constantly flickering. Yeah, or your frame rate, or constantly recalculating the position of things in the world, right? I mean, I think a lot of people have that sense of that's what the brain is actually, constantly calculating where everything is in the world. It's quite a modern idea. But what's so he talked about the succession, but is he looking for something beyond that as well?
Right, something lasting and persistent.
Right. So he seems to think that somehow the succession and all of the change in experience has to have something in it that lasts and persists. It has to have a ground.
Harry says our subjective reality, recognition of a thing by a spectrum of opposites.
Okay.
So it just
Recognition of a thing by a spectrum of opposites. Interesting. Okay, sorry, Joe.
is this line only in that which persists, therefore are temporal relations possible?
Yeah.
Something needs to be grounded in order to have some sense of time, because otherwise everything's shifting.
Yeah, maybe you need a point of reference.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe you need a point of reference. Okay, let's continue. The proof is that is demanded must therefore establish that we have experience and not merely imagination about the things, which cannot be accomplished unless one can prove that even our inner experience, undoubted by Descartes, is possible only under the presupposition of outer experience. Okay. I seem to build on the last paragraph a bit. So we were just looking for what persists in the succession of experience. Now what are we looking for? It references inner experience and outer experience. What's the relationship?
So does that, sorry, this might not be answering a question, but just to clarify, is there a question of does that outer experience actually impact my inner experience? And if so, how does it do it?
Right. That's the inverse question.
Oh, sorry, yeah, okay.
No, this is very hard. This is very complicated.
Or in fact, what am I projecting something? So something happens there, and I'm almost meeting it with my.
Follow how Kant begins. So remember, he begins with appearances.
Yeah.
He discerned in the appearances that there must be something persisting. And now he's generalizing. Inner experience must presuppose outer experience. We can try and get a bit more concrete about what that might mean, but if my personal perspective is to be valid, it must have some kind of public point of reference that is shared. Let's say that might be one way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
But notice how the orientation of the question is quite fundamental, because he doesn't take that for granted and then infer the subjective experience. He takes the subjective experience as granted and is now trying to prove the objective world.
Okay, yeah.
But he's trying to prove it in such a way that if that wasn't the case, if there was no objective world, I could make no sense of my experience.
Right.
That's the claim.
Yeah.
The objective world is a presupposition. It's not a deduction. It's not a deduction. That's a methodological point of interest. It's not a deduction. It's a presupposition. If then.
Okay.
This is called a transcendental argument in the literature.
Okay.
And Kant's I think probably the first to do it. It's a new style of argument he invents to deal with the question as he sees it, because he's going through his own what he called a Copernican revolution, where he's flipping the fundamental question of philosophy on its head, right to how we experience things. And okay, so
Jack,
yes,
I'm going to push off now because I don't want to be too late, feeling a little bit poorly. But
Yes.
I'll leave the chat. But I think anyone can unmute themselves if they want to contribute.
Yes.
And yeah, thank you for a brilliant talk so far, Jack. And I'll catch up on the rest when we've got the recording, because the recording will keep going until everyone's exited the chat later.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you, Sam.
Brilliant. Thank you all.
Good night.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Yes, it did. We are running a bit over, but if you don't mind us continuing, we can go a little bit further.
Yeah.
And I think this is all really interesting stuff. I think we're making a bit of progress. So okay, so
By the sounds of the number of London fire brigade they've gone past, I think London's about to
I
collapse.
think you're right, Dara. Yeah.
Maybe they're just here to arrest you for going over time.
Maybe. So so finally, this line here illustrates one of the important consequences of this method. The pure concepts of the understanding, meaning of how we think, have no meaning whatsoever when they quit the objects of experience and assert as things in themselves. Oof. A sentence.
Very German.
So.
Very German.
So, pure concept of the understanding. So we have ideas. He's saying the ideas have no meaning whatsoever when they quit experience, when they stop talking about experience. So I have an idea of cause, but if I was to try and generalize that to talk about God, who's not an empirical phenomenon, like a first cause, that would be illegitimate for Kant, because God isn't given in my experience in a way that the glass is. That's one of the important consequences of this method. If I begin with my experience, and my experience is basically empirical, scientific experience of a natural world, and if my understanding is relative to that, and if the whole proof of the intelligibility of my experience rests on trying to ground sort of essentially scientific concepts like cause and unity and distinction and negation, when I'm trying to do metaphysics and think about things that aren't given, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. I don't have the same ground. I've now left the ground. That's why it's called The Critique of Pure Reason, his seminal book. Because you can't purely reason anymore. You can't do pure reason. You can only do science.
Are you saying you can't do pure reason because of the empirical method?
In a way, yes, but yes, exactly. In a way, yes, but Kant isn't an empiricist.
No.
Because he does the deduction, like the presupposition argument.
Yeah. Okay.
So he brings in the intelligible realm, but he says that I can only use it well, and I can only use it with confidence and with certainty when I'm talking about empirical things.
Okay.
Now he does think to do science we need the empirical, like we need the intelligible.
Yeah.
So he's not like Hume, where you just, science is purely inductive. He does think that there's something deductive about science because it ultimately finds itself expressed in law. That's why I mentioned he studied Newton and Leibniz, two great mathematicians. When Kant read Hume, he was really concerned.
Yeah.
Well, what about all the maths that I like doing?
Yeah.
So one of the unfortunate consequences of this method is that now we don't really know where the pure ideas leave it. Now, this is a gross simplification. Kant has this is a huge book. It seems like this is too big a book to just say that. Kant has a lot to say about the role of metaphysics in light of this problem. And he has a lot to say about things in themselves, even though, according to his own view, you can't say anything about them.
Uh-huh.
So he's really interesting. If you go on, Dara. I need to go on as well, actually. Let's skip that. And let's skip that because I want to keep it a bit simple for time. Kant limits pure understanding, but he does try to save the pure realm, or the purely intelligible realm, and that's where the ethics comes in. So you asked earlier what the connection between the ethics and and sort of the sensible world, or how did you put your question precisely, Joe?
Do you mean the external?
We brought up let me see if I can refresh. We brought up brought up Kant's I can't quite remember how we got there. We talked a bit about the Kant concept of spirit. That was it.
Oh, yeah.
And Kant's concept of spirit was about the will being able to conform itself to a universal form.
And so how do I get my will to tell my body what to do?
How do I get my will to tell my body what to do? Okay, so for Kant, practical reason, which is his name for ethics or moral philosophy, is it comes from the same source as the reasoning about the empirical world. So it's still coming from me, but this is just another way of seeing the world. I can see the world as a place of things, or I can see the world as a forum for action, for moral action and morally responsible action. I think really the answer to that question is that both in a way are appearances, and Kant just essentially hypothesizes that they have a unity. And insofar as appearances don't necessarily tell you anything about fundamental reality, namely, so for instance, scientists talk about a deterministic world. Now, Kant would say that's true of appearances, but is it true of fundamental reality? Well, on his view, you can't say. But in the moral philosophy, which is a different way of seeing the world, it actually is revealed that freedom is the fullness of who the human subject is. It's sort of essential to our freedom. So it's essential to our nature. So they have a unity because they're just two different ways of seeing the world, which don't tell you what the world is in itself, though moral reality does seem to go deeper. Okay, I think that's a summary answer. I think that's probably a good place maybe to end.
Yeah, I should probably.
Because I think we're covering quite a lot. I've not gotten on to Hegel, but I think it's probably a bit too much at this stage.
I'd be keen to talk about Hegel sometime. So,
Yeah.
I think the best way to do it would be to do one philosopher per session and deep into it.
Maybe. But I think it's interesting to see
I
that.
guess this is thematic, isn't it?
Yeah, you are right there. It is more thematic there.
It's true. It is, and I wanted to try and do them together because there's a continuity. They culminate in something. Hegel is a philosopher of subjectivity.
Yeah.
And he gets rid of the thing in itself that lingers in Kant. We haven't spent so much time to talk about what the thing in itself means, but Hegel gets rid of it and he just says there are appearances and we can just talk about appearances and it's fine. And they have a kind of historical logic and it's really very mystical. But in that he begins from this place of should we be doubting the sense faculties? He thinks that he basically thinks Descartes' method already is making an error of this doubting thing. He thinks this doubting thing is really strange. We have nothing else to go on but our experience. Why doubt it? Why doubt our faculties? That for Hegel, that's the real error. So it's interesting. They begin with principles and objective world and mathematics and science, and they sort of steer towards the subject, and then where the object is questionable.
Yeah.
But all of this from Luther. Anyway, I will say good night to those who are still on the chat. Thank you all for attending. And do tune in in a fortnight's time.
2 weeks.
2 weeks time for, I think Sam will talk to us about the French Revolution. And also I think about the American and Haitian Revolution. And if there is popular request, we could fit in another seminar on this topic of Kant and Hegel, because there's a lot more to say.
Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. Good night.
See you. Bye.